What's cropping up, stockers? Zack, the stock cropper. Outstanding in my fields. This week's video is going to be about something I've wanted to do for a long time, and that's going to be on drain tile. Keep trying to show this tile trench right there. I'm out in one of my dad's fields that he pattern tiled last fall, and I'm getting ready to do some of the trench closing and clean up, and eventually I'm going to strip till this field and try to grow some corn again in it this spring. But why make a video on drainage, tile, things of that issues? Because I haven't seen very many good videos that have ever been put out. It's usually or podcasts or things of that nature. There's a lot of things that people get kind of right when they talk about this stuff, in my opinion, but they don't give the full context. And it's usually one of two positions. Their egg drain tile is infallible and does nothing but good things for everyone. Or the other side is that all of the drain tile in the Midwest is sacrilege. We should cut all the tiles, turn it back into prairie potholes, and give the land back to the Indians and the buffalo. And like most things in this polarized world, the fringes are full of lunacy and idiocy, and the truth lies in the middle. So I'm going to make a video today talking about where I think the truth lies when it comes to putting pipe in the ground. So let's go. So let's talk a little basics here, just for those that might be watching that don't understand maybe some of the technical reasons of why farmers tile. Where I live in north central Iowa, we would not be farming if it wasn't for drainage. When this land was settled, it was basically some uplands and then marshes in between. And in order to farm Winnebago County, where I live, we had to come in and install drainage ditches and then expand out with clay tile. That's how it happened. The big chunk of land, about a third of my acres, actually sit right next to DD1, which was the first drainage ditch that was installed, I think, in the late 1800s. And they had a floating dredge that they basically went through the low spots of the east central part of Winnebago County, and basically dug a big drainage ditch for the marshes along there to all drain. And if they hadn't done that, farms that I farm wouldn't be farmable because it would just be too wet. And if you can't farm in a swamp, you got to have air for your root system. And so tile drainage was a very much necessary thing to enable agriculture here where I farm. So when the first drainage ditches were put in, the first clay mains came out, and usually what farmers tiled back then were just the spots that were the lowest and wettest spots on the farm, just to try to get the farm drained. And then farmers were patient with waiting for the hillsides and stuff for the water to seep down to the tiles below in the low spots and take the water away. And that's a lot of how things were drained, back in my great-grandfather's and grandfather's day. There wasn't such a thing as pattern tile, because tile was installed by hand, and they had to dig it in back in those days. They didn't have the machines that we have today that have really enabled pattern tiling. And so when we're talking about pattern tiling, we're talking about taking a farm and putting in a systemic grid of drainage, like what you just saw, or what you'll see here in the overhead shots that I have, where you go in and come up with a plan based off of the outlet mains that you have, and then you install lots of laterals so that you get a grid pattern to ensure that you have a consistent amount of drainage across the entire farm. And really what you're trying to do is you're trying to lower the water table to a certain depth, so that you typically have 3 to 4 feet of ground above the tile line that can have air and oxygen in it, to make sure that you have good productive plant growth, because roots will not grow unless they have access to oxygen. So they will grow to that line of saturation and they'll grow no more. So really, when you're putting the tile drainage in, you're trying to establish an environment for successful root growth and proliferation. So not only are we trying to make a robust profile for roots growth underground, tile makes farming just a lot easier because you're not fighting mud or trying to wait, for fields to dry out. We get smaller and smaller windows, it feels like, as the years go on with increased weather volatility, and tile makes it possible to get in quicker and get the job done and get out and give yourself the best chance for a profitable crop. So we've set stuff up a little bit about a lot of the positive parts of tile, but I wanted to come in here to the marker board so I could draw and illustrate some stuff on my own to kind of show some of the things. We're going to talk through some of the claims or the myths that people talk about tile drainage, and use the marker board to better explain and dissect some of these concepts. So we're going to talk through 3 commonly discussed claims on YouTube's or podcasts or whatever discussions. So the first one is tile decreases erosion, tile does not lead to increased flooding, and tile is good for water quality. So these are claims that are typically made by farm influencers or people in the ag industry talking about tile drainage. So we're going to start with the top one, which is tile decreases erosion. So what I did here in my terrible drawing skills, I drew a landscape with some corn growing on it and a little bit of upland and lowland, and then I put pattern tile like we just saw in my field out there, where we've got a tile every, say, 40 or 60 feet or whatever, and then a spot where we don't have it, to show really what you're trying to do from helping decrease erosion. So the argument is, if we have a water table that is managed down to this level, which is, say, 3 to 4 feet below typically the surface, it gives us all of this volume space in here where we have capacity and room to store rain. And so that's really the benefit they sell people on, is instead of having an area over here like where there's not tile and the water table is high and we have very little room for additional water storage, we want to have a whole bank of storage here so the water can hit the ground and come in and not run off. Because when we run into a lot of our pollution issues from ag, it's typically a majority of it comes from surface runoff. When we have soil that's actually moving and going into rivers and taking nutrients like phosphorus with it, it's typically from runoff. And so that's the argument with tile drainage decreasing erosion. It gives soils the capacity to store more rain here. So in the upper 3 foot of soil in Iowa here, we can probably store, depending on our organic matter percentage, anywhere from probably 6 to 8 inches. Usually they say it's 2 to 2.5 inches per foot of topsoil of what we're able to store. So we can store a lot of water. So we can, we should be able to take a pretty good rainfall event, 2 or 3 inch rainfall event on the landscape and have it land and go in and then slowly drain away with the tile drainage system underneath it. The problem with this idea is that it assumes in our agricultural systems that when the rain falls from the sky and it lands on the hill, that it actually infiltrates on the hill. That's really not what happens. It's not what happens because it has this hope or fantasy is contingent on how we manage the land. So just because we have tile doesn't mean we have infiltration. If we do a lot of tillage, which what we do in this part of the state in Iowa or southern Minnesota or lots of places across the Corn Belt, we do, I would say in our part of the landscape, we have probably 80 to 90% that relies heavily on substantial tillage. And when you till that upper, 4 inches to 6 inches in depth across the landscape, you destroy all of the aggregate stability, the pore spaces, all of those things that allow for good rainfall infiltration to happen. So if you till the living piss out of the surface, instead of getting this infiltration, like say up on this hilltop, to go in and then be taken off the tile there, what we normally get, if I get my marker out here, is the rainfall falling up here, and instead of going down, what it ends up doing is it runs down to the bottom and then builds up around the tile riser and then has to go through this tile here. So in the process of doing it, it's moved soil down the hill, it's moved nutrients, whether it's nitrogen or phosphorus or potassium, or whatever is attached. It moves herbicide down to the bottom, and we still get ponding. So if you drive by a field that's been pattern tiled and you still see ponding, especially in the low spots, you know that you probably don't have a very well functioning soil, because if everything is functioning well, you should be able to, you're going to get some movement with gravity, understood. But what we see in a lot of these heavy rainfall events is our infiltration is not good because our soil structure is poor, and we crust over, we collapse those pore spaces, we have poor infiltration, and we end up really not maximizing the benefit of the water holding capacity we should have underneath that top layer of soil. So this is something I see every year, or every spring, especially this time of the year, especially right around planting time, where you can see these huge differences in infiltration. And I've got a couple pictures here I'm going to walk you through. So the first picture here is actually back from 2012. This was, my first year of strip tilling was in 2011, the fall of 11, and this picture is from the fall of 12. On the left side of the picture is the field that we strip tilled some corn stalks on the fall before. Hadn't touched anything in the spring. The neighbor had done a couple passes with a field cultivator, fertilized and planted, and this is the difference in infiltration between right across the fence. And the fun thing about this picture is that there's a county main that goes underneath where the water hole is, and it actually flows from right to left, and we're actually lower on the landscape on our side of the fence. So why don't we have a big pond? I can tell you in the past when we used to do the same thing, we had a pond there too. The difference is the water actually infiltrated up the hill instead of all running to the bottom, because we had pore spaces and root channels that were still open from the year past. This next image that I have here was sent to me from a buddy today when I told him I was making this video and was thinking about how to illustrate infiltration. He has a similar picture here where he's got some looks like no-till corn stalks with a cover crop coming up with intense tillage right next door. And you can see there is some water standing on his side of the fence. My guess is this is right next to the axis where there's some compaction where he would have poor soil structure naturally. But when you look out into the field, you see the amount of pounding right to left. This is a common sight. And I don't know if guys don't notice this or look at it and just say that's just farming, but I see this replicated all over the place every spring. Now, it's not to say that if you use some of these other practices that you're not going to have ponding. Believe me, after last year, I had a lot of ponding. I had the most ponding and replant I've had in 15 years of farming, because once the profile gets full and the tiles are full, there's nowhere for the water to go. So no matter what you're doing, it doesn't make any difference. So if some people like to make the claim that if you have soil health, you don't need tile drainage, that's a bunch of shit too, okay? So, and I want to call that out because I've heard that said at a lot of meetings. In order to have healthy soils and to take advantage of the attributes of soil health with infiltration, you need to have a way to get rid of and to be able to manage the water underneath, no matter what type of a system that you have. It's in the more moderate rainfall events that you'll see differentiation like these last two pictures. But if you get 12 inches of rain, everybody's going to be in the same boat pretty quickly. And as direct proof of that, here's a picture from the farm that I started this video with that we pattern tiled, and why we pattern tiled it. This is a picture of one of our side hills where, because we didn't have tile running up those side hills, we got about a foot of rain in a couple weeks, and we were saturated all the way to the top. And when you're saturated and there's nowhere for that water to run in, even when you have minimum till like strip till with cover crops, a system that should be charged to be able to take water in, you still, if you haven't managed that water table, there's nowhere for it to go. It just runs down the slope, and when it did, it takes the path of least resistance, which was my strips, which I destroyed the internal strength and pore space, and that's why it washed. So especially in systems like this is proof positive. Nothing is foolproof. For those that say I trying to hold my system up and not call the good out or the bad out with the good, like this is evidence of how it can go wrong and why managing things properly with drainage can make these systems a lot more resilient. So the next claim that we have up on the board is tile doesn't increase flooding or impacts downstream. And this one goes, this one is especially for my good buddy Vance Crow, because he's had several comments about this on his podcast on how that's one of his Peter Thiel paradoxes in regards to he believes that it very much does so. And I agree with him, because what is the purpose of tile if it's not speeding up getting water off the land? That's why we tile. You know, if we weren't getting rid of the water more quickly, having more tile than less tile, then why the hell would we do it? Like, when farmers or ag people say that, it just makes no sense to me at all. Like, when we put these pattern tile systems in, especially with these older mains with the increased rainfall amounts, the whole idea is to pack that main full with as much water as possible to get it off the ground, so that we can get oxygen back into the soil, and often be somebody else's problem. And that has an impact. That goes downstream. In my case, I farm where water goes in 3 different directions to 3 different watersheds, but it all ends up in the Mississippi. Some of it goes to the Des Moines River, some of it goes to the Minnesota River, and some of it ends up going to the Winnebago, Shell Rock, and eventually the Cedar River and into Mississippi. So the whole point of tile drainage is to increase the flow of the water off the farm, which means that down river they will have bigger intensity flooding events from that. Now, it can be said, and I've heard people make the argument, that because if we have this buffering agent, we'll be able to hold more water. That is true. But again, it goes back to the infiltration. The only way that you kind of normalized the amount of water flow is if that you have the capacity to store it in the soil. And if we're not having the capacity to store it in the soil and just running to the bottom anyway, then that's all a bunch of hogwash. Okay, so in the olden times, the water just sat there, okay, because it took a long time to finally seep over to the main or down the hill where it would finally drain, okay? So, but we don't have that anymore. Our farms dry out quicker because we get it off the land faster, which is just physics, okay? Physics and math on the fact we increase. So let's just stop saying that we don't. We do. It's going to get worse as the data on the high precipitable rainfall events that we have in the Midwest since the 1970s has been on an increase like that. And that's not global warming or climate change or whatever people want to dismiss it. That's just what's happened. Hopefully it'll turn around, just like hopefully the tariffs are going to fix everything in the world too, but I'm not convinced of either at this point. So the last claim we're going to hit on today, and this one's going to take some time because it's complicated, but it's the one that probably gets under my skin the most, is folks that claim that tile it helps increase water quality, which is possible for it to be true, but in reality, ag has a major blind spot to acknowledging what actually happens. So we're going to talk about that. So back up to our board here with pattern tile. So people make the claim, again, that tile helps minimize erosion, which erosion can be the leading cause of water quality issues with sediment and things like that rolling off the surface or going directly into tiles or into waterways, which dump into rivers, which can carry a lot of things. So the idea is if we filter the water through the soil can act as a good filter, and if we do a good job, we should have low amounts of sediment, and if soils are functioning properly, low amounts of sediment and nutrients coming out the tile lines. Again, in a perfect world, that's how it should be. The problem is that most people know we don't live in a perfect world, and so what we're going to talk about now is we're going to talk specifically about nitrogen and how we manage nitrogen in a lot of areas of the Corn Belt, and why the idea that tile is good for water quality is kind of, it's kind of bullshit, to be honest with you, because with probably 60% of how we manage soils and fertility in the Corn Belt, in my opinion, leads to an obvious decrease in water quality, and it's a choice. It's a management choice that farmers make, and so we're going to explain that now. So I wish I would have studied harder in art class so that my graphics department was stronger, but here we go. So what I did was I just made a little bit of a graph here with time and months along the x-axis, and then we have a couple different lines, different colors represent different things. So here we have the amount of precipitation, the orange line here that you can see decreasing in fall, low in the wintertime, increasing during the spring months of the year. We have when crop growth actually happens, so the middle of May when we start to get roots to go into the soil to take up nitrogen fertilizer, and kind of that curve of an uptake of nitrogen throughout the growing season kind of peaking there about the end of August for maximum uptake of N, and then kind of waning off as we move into September. And last but not least, this is the line of when we, or some of us anyway, put nitrogen on. And I would say, I don't know what this percentage is, but I would, if I had to guess, I would say that probably somewhere between 60 to 70% of growers, or 60% to 70% of the acres out there, and I could be wrong on this, and if you want to crucify me on that, maybe in your locality it's different, but I would guess that we probably have a pretty good front load of nitrogen starting to be applied with hog manure or chicken litter, anything like that in October, increasing with anhydrous coming in, and more manure hopefully in November after soils have cooled, and or manure, anhydrous, spring wind, front loading before planting. And when I look at this, there's a couple comments. So the idea is that if we're applying manure or anhydrous to soils in the fall with 50 degrees and cooling, and we're using stabilizers, that there shouldn't be a lot of inherent risk to losing that nitrogen over the course of the fall, or over the course of the winter. A lot of years, realistically, that is the case. But in the case that it doesn't work out that well, and we have increased precip, especially in the months of March, April, and May, and we have conditions that will convert these somewhat stable forms of manure into forms of nitrate, NO3, which is free to move with free water in the soil and go from here into here, and then eventually into the river. This is the risk that we play. And so when we run into certain years where precipitation is higher than the other, we can have various outcomes with how much or how fast we lose nitrogen to both plant upgrowth and environmental loss. And so I have three scenarios here I put. The first scenario is a good condition, which I would guess probably 5 years out of 10, if I had to estimate. If we put stuff on in the fall, that we can have fairly good success and really not be penalized by not spreading that risk out further. Well, we'll have enough nitrogen left between what's in the soil, gets mineralized naturally, versus what we add with fertilizer to get to the finish line of physiological maturity with corn. Or we have other years where we get a little bit more rain, maybe in June, and we bump down and we kind of ride the lightning and have just enough. Or we have years like 2024 in southern Minnesota and northern Iowa, where we got 25 inches of rain between the 25th of April and the 4th of July, and a lot of these fields were nitrogen deficient substantially by the first week of June and really showing pain. And so that's the situation we're in. And when we have this situation, it's really bad, because not only have we lost that nitrogen for the farm in the hope of the corn crop, we have to now go and apply more to try to salvage any potential. But so we have that expense, but now we've also lost either two forms of loss. One would be nitrate, which would go there into the tile, or if you get into anaerobic conditions without oxygen, it'll actually convert to N2 gas and actually just gas up through the soil and then back into the 78% of the atmosphere that nitrogen constitutes. Either way, it's lost. It's not a good thing for the farmer, and it's definitely not a good thing for people downstream that have to deal with it, like the Des Moines Water Works that has to fire up a nitrate removal facility, or the zone of hypoxia, the poor buggers that have to try to make a living fishing in the Gulf, that deal with the nutrient loading, subsequent algae bloom, and then the breakdown of the algae, which causes the zone of hypoxia down there. So a lot of issues with this. And this is the part when people say tile is good for water quality. Tile can be good for water quality if we have this buffer and we're spoon feeding nitrogen. But that would mean we would have to take our nitrogen applications, if we're really being realistic, especially in some of these wet years, and take them from here when most people want to do it. And we do it here because it's a convenient time. There's no agronomic benefit other than if conditions are good. I guess one could make an argument. But the risk level profile for putting nitrogen on, in some cases 8 months ahead of when the peak uptake would be. If you explain that to a city person on how we do that, it doesn't make a lot of damn sense. But if you're a farmer, it makes sense because, hey, that's when we have available time, and we don't want to do it here and keep the planter waiting because we have tight windows. We just want to keep the corn planter going at 10 miles an hour. That's why we do it. But if we're going to do that and we're going to front load that stuff and increase the risk, saying that tile and having this sewer system underneath to take the nitrate directly out, and we have it in this prone loss where we have no growing roots, essentially, other than the 5% of acres that have, some kind of cover crop growing on them to hopefully hold that nutrient until we get to this point where we actually get corn roots taking it up. This one's a tough pill to swallow, and the proof is in the pudding. We know that we lose on average in the state of Iowa somewhere between, depends on the year, but a lot of the data shows anywhere between 20 to 40, 45 pounds of nitrogen in the wetter years. And it's bad for the farmer because they have the economic loss of usually yields that correspond, and it's bad for the other people down the stream, that we've talked about already here. So a lot of stuff there, but that's my my ramblings on how nitrogen works with tile.
So why make a video like this? It's really about accountability, at the end of the day. And that, I know, accountability is something in our society and culture today that seems to be rather fleeting, where where the buck stops really with no one, because if we're ever questioned or have concerns raised against things that we do or say, we just play the blame game or the yeah but game, or try to deflect attention away to something else. And agriculture unfortunately does that a lot. And when I've watched videos in the past or content about tile drainage, it seems like only the shiny, pretty things when it comes to tile drainage are highlighted, and we miss the context of some of the realities, the inconvenient truths, so to speak, about how this stuff works. And so I think it's important to be honest. I think it's important to be accountable. It's not that there aren't other issues that can contribute. Like a lot of people talk a lot about golf courses or lawns or sewer drains, things like that. Those are all very, very viable causes of environmental concerns. But they do not justify what we do without being questioned about it. And I think that should be the take-home point, that we think about what we do and we're honest in representing what actually happens out here on the landscape. And hopefully we work to improve that stuff if we want to have a positive future. I think drain tile is really important, and I want to be able to keep using it. I want to be able to keep putting it in without a lot of onerous regulation. But if we're going to do that, we've got to be responsible. And so that's why I made this video today. I hope you enjoyed it. If you disagreed with anything, leave me some comments, or if you think I'm wrong, I'm happy to stand corrected, as always. But appreciate your time and attention, and thanks for watching.